Welcome to season 3 of Stage Dive. My name is Jack Dawkins. I am your host. I am the one running this crazy show that we have. And before we get into this season, it feels appropriate to say that when I started this whole journey, my idea was that as I was getting ready to start performing on stage, I wanted to talk to the people who had already done it. I wanted to talk to experts and other performers and get their insights and the way that they rehearse and how they engage with an audience, et cetera, et cetera. But what I quickly learned in interviewing all these wonderful people is that more artists just need their stories to be told. Because so often there's a question, how do you push through the sticky bits of going from zero to performer, or going from having trained and rehearsed your whole life to becoming a performer who's on stage and actually making any money doing this crazy shit? And so that's where the focus has really shifted. And season 3 in particular is where we really start to step into that. So if you want to know more about performance and performing, you can still get that here. But more importantly, there's so much more humanity in these episodes. There's a much bigger focus on who these people are, where they come from, what their stories are. And that makes me so happy. I have my guest today is a special one. Her name is Amanda Edwards, and she is an intimacy coordinator. Now, if you don't know what an intimacy coordinator is, that's okay, because I didn't either until a couple of months ago. I had a crazy idea for a music video that involved some people not wearing a lot of clothes, and realized very quickly that I alone did not have the tools, the resources, or the capacity to hold an appropriate space where people felt safe, even if there was limited clothing available. And that is exactly what an intimacy coordinator is for. That's not a great definition. Amanda gives a much better one in the episode. But I just want you to know that it's a fascinating look into some of the things happening behind the scenes that we don't necessarily get to see when the credits roll afterward. So if you want an understanding of what movie sets and TV sets can look like behind the scenes, this is a perfect episode for you. Thank you again to Amanda for your work on our video shoot, but more importantly, for spending your time here with us on this episode. Please enjoy. First question for you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have a favorite scene or shot from the last 2 days?
That totally puts me on the spot, doesn't it? Favorite. Okay, so full disclosure, I have ADHD. So asking me to pick a favorite anything is like, my brain just does not categorize things in that way. So I can tell you some moments that I really loved that would then probably be like favorite.
Great. That's perfect.
I loved the playing with the sunflower. Just felt like, oh, those ladies got so beautiful. I mean, they already were, but that was just a sweet and beautiful moment. I loved navigating and figuring out the cuddle puddle, and that took so much collaboration, really, from everyone. There was so much trust and vulnerability and willingness to try and have it be wrong and try again together. And that would probably be one of the favorites too. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I like there are no wrong answers. Those are both beautiful, particularly the cuddle puddle, because that was one of like the original ideas where it's like, I don't know why, I just have this idea. And if we can make it happen, that would be amazing. And the fact that like, again, from brain to like actual thing, always a gift.
You did.
Yeah, we did it, right? It happened. Now I'm going to take you kind of in a different direction, which is what happens in your brain when you try to pick a favorite? Like what is the actual lived experience in your head when your brain tries to sort and organize that information?
It goes blank. Like, you asked me what my favorite shot was yesterday or the day before, in the last 2 days. We did no shots in the last 2 days. There's nothing there. I have nothing to pull from. So I have learned very quickly that when someone asks me my favorite something, I have to make a subcategory of what they've just asked me, because then I can probably pull a folder from somewhere in there and it doesn't all just disappear. Like, ask me my favorite movie. I've never seen a movie.
Yeah. What are movies? Crazy. That's fascinating. And how long have you been working on sets?
On and off for most of my adult life. I grew up in the theater. So my parents are musicians. My mom also does some dance and acting. And so I just grew up surrounded by that. And so I was in the dance studio from the time I was, I think, 2.5 was when I first started dance. So I was always performing in everything that I could perform in. And then in adulthood, sort of transitioned to trying some film stuff here and there. Colorado doesn't have a huge market for that. So it was never a gigantic part of my life. It's only been in recent years with the development of the intimacy role that it really has become a much bigger part of my existence. But yeah, it's been a long time that I've been working in the performance realm.
Yeah. I'm curious, like when you go back to that, how much of that was you proactively pushing versus like just the nature of your parents' work and sort of lives where you're being pulled into these kind of creative spaces?
Um, that okay. So my mom had my brother when I was 2.5 years old, and they weren't in a position to get childcare for me when my father, what his job at one of his jobs at the time was the pianist for New Jersey Ballet at the dance classes. This is before there were like CDs and stuff that or like the iPod Shuffle that now you just put on the Spotify playlist for ballet
Right.
class, right? This is before there was a live pianist. That was my dad. So I just went with him to the dance studio while my mom stayed home with my baby brother. I was just there. So I did all the classes, even, the little kid ones, but even, we're there late and the
Sure.
professional ballerinas come in late and I'm sometimes falling asleep behind the piano and sometimes holding the bar and doing my plies with the prima ballerinas. And,
Oh my God.
so I think I fell into it sort of accidentally in that way, but then it very quickly became such a dance specifically became such a big part of my identity and
Mm.
my sense of safety. Was I really found that at the bar in the dance studio. So when stuff didn't feel good at home or at school, I was at the dance studio and I would be there pretty much every day after school until 8 or 9, and then Saturday mornings I would take classes too. It just became my a home base for me, and it's the ballet bar absolutely is still a home base for me even all these years later. So I think it started like convenient, let's just bring the kid along to the dance studio,
For
and then
sure.
became very much an integral part of who I am and how I identify myself as a human.
Yeah, 1,000%. And the fact that you brought up the term safety is fascinating to me. And this season on the podcast in particular, this idea of needing safety to be able to create authentically has been a theme that comes up over and over and over again. Which I again is like I don't know if it's that it's not talked about or it's that I have only been an artist for a relatively short amount of time. And so these conversations have always been happening. I've just never been exposed to them or a little of A and B. I'm curious, like when you look back, did it register as safety or like how would you describe the embodied experience of being on the bar when there was like turmoil or chaos kind of happening around you?
Yeah, I think so from sixth grade, I knew that I wanted to be a therapist. I think I had a very keen awareness of my own lack of safety in certain
Mm,
environments. Therefore, I would have had an awareness of that sense of safety at the bar, or in the studio. It's a predictable environment. The adults are most of the time, relatively speaking, they are safe and appropriate in the
yes.
way they interact with you and consistent in the
Yes.
way they interact with you. Especially in ballet, it is very prescriptive. So you know exactly what to expect and what order things are going to go in. And I valued that very much so from a very young age. So I think I knew that in myself, but I don't think that's a common thing in the creative industries at all yet. I think we're moving that direction, right? As you can see with intimacy coordinators, right? But I think still the priority is the product and the profits, and it's not the performers.
Right.
But we're moving in a better direction, I think.
Yes. I mean, because we have to. Like, like I say this lovingly. It is at once absolutely worth celebrating that more and more people are investing in the health and safety of performers, including the performers themselves. I think the perspective within the community of performers themselves has absolutely evolved. I also think we've sort of hit the backstop of like, we can't get worse. Like there is no more room. Like we've run out. And so we have to start getting better. So like, again, there's a beautiful side and there's a darkness to it, but
Yeah.
both.
I mean,
Both.
statistically speaking, creative professionals are, 1 in 4 could be diagnosed with a substance use disorder. We are 22 times more likely to unalive ourselves than general population. I mean,
Wow.
it's a crisis. So yeah, that's why I do what I do, though.
Yes, yes, and you are working toward that. Which like, so in sixth grade, you knew you wanted to be a therapist. Was that a moment? Was that a gradual realizing? Was that meeting the person? Like, how did that sort of like knowing come to be?
It was not meeting the person. That's what it was I needed a person. I
Yes.
needed a grown up. I needed a safe grown up. I needed someone, and there was no one. And so my
Mm.
little ambitious 6th grade brain went, well, I'm going to be that grown up. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to become that grown up so that other people don't have to feel this way.
Yeah. Um, That's amazing and very clear, which is which is amazing. So you had that knowing in sixth grade. How did it play out over the ensuing years?
I floated around a bit in college, mostly because of dysfunctional relationships, like romantic relationships, kind of led
Mm.
me to transfer a couple of times to colleges. But I ended up graduating with my bachelor's up at CSU, and then went on to get my master's in counseling. And I have been a therapist since 2010, I think. So I'm not a baby anymore. I worked in Aurora at Aurora Community Mental Health Center for a number of years, and then started my private practice a few years back. And so now I juggle my private practice with intimacy coordination and mental health coordination and raising my kids and, just
Amongst other
life.
things. Yeah. All right. Well, so it's interesting. Professionally, you have your hands in all kinds of art, but from a personal perspective, like what does your personal artistic practice look like right now?
Don't remind me.
Okay.
Because I got to get my butt back in the dance studio, really, is what that is. Um, movement is like medicine for my body. And really, dance is the best way for me to access that. Schedule wise, that's really challenging. And I have a ballet bar in my basement. So we'll call this the nudge that I needed to get on it.
Yeah. Well, like the nudge comes from a loving place as someone who has also been in the space of like, I desire to create. I acknowledge that within myself, but I don't know if this is age. I don't know what it is. Like I, creating for me requires some amount of space. It requires some amount of ease. Like can you write a song under pressure? Yes, you can force something out. But like when you think about creating in a way that actually like nourishes and fills you up, it has to be in a nourishing creating space. So like, could you do 10 minutes on the bar every day? 1,000%. If it was like with a fucking timer on your phone and you can hear your kids upstairs and you know you have a phone call coming, like would it give you what you need? Probably not, if I had to take a wild guess. Um, it's like that's the interesting tension. Like I know that I feel like are in a larger conversation about like the importance of habits and consistency and like just show up. And it's like sort of like yes, I understand why consistency is valuable and habits and blah blah blah. But
Mhm.
like if you're talking about soul, if you're talking about nourishment, if you're talking about like feeling aliveness, ooh, habits not as great. Like
Mhm.
I don't find that they serve the same purpose.
Yeah, yeah. I do find good balance in managing my private practice and maintaining consistency with my clients because I work
Yes.
with exclusively with complex trauma and dissociative disorders. So these are people who need same day, same time every week, some of them
Mm,
multiple times in a week. And so that is such a like the beating drum of my
Yes.
schedule. And then my intimacy work and mental health coordination work, that is more of where there is fluidity and flow and the opportunity for me to be 100% present in a creative process with other people for what feels to my system like a flash in the pan. Because my practice, I work with people 5, 10, 15 years. And on the other side of things, we're talking about 2, 4, 10, maybe max days on set. And then the project is done. And that to me gives my system a great deal of balance. And that feels like self-care, is not having all of my professional life in one bucket. I get to spread it out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. So we have the therapy angle, and I know you shared the story with me last night, but for the benefit of our dear listeners, how did intimacy coordination sort of come into your purview as both an option and then eventually something that you chose to pursue?
Yeah, it wasn't really on my radar until some male presenting individual slid into my DMs and inquired about using me as an actress for some shorts that he had written and was directing and was going to star in. So it was essentially just him and a camera and me, and the shorts were about relationships. And so he asked my comfort around simulated sex. And in my mind, lots of alarm bells going off. This does not feel safe at all. But then I question, wait, am I overreacting? Is this actually, should I be asking other questions? What's happening here? So I reached out to a friend of mine who was in my acting class at the time, a male friend. And I said, so someone requested me do this thing and I'm seeing all the red flags. What are your thoughts? And he said, don't you dare do that project. That sounds like a nightmare, to put it mildly. And also he goes, if this guy really wants to do this right, he needs an intimacy coordinator. And knowing you would be an awesome intimacy coordinator. And because of the ADHD, plus I'm also a Gemini, it literally took me 24 hours to buy all the books and sign up for all the classes and decide that this was my new hyper focus. And I absolutely 125% was committed to doing this thing. And that was several years ago.
My gosh, I so applaud the diving in with both feet and hands and face.
I don't
that's
know how
amazing.
else to do things.
I'm sure it has its downsides from time to time and can also have tremendous upsides. So hooray, hooray. Um, and so I will share this. Originally, not a month ago, I probably wasn't in a wholly different situation than the person who slid into your DMs. I would love to be on my high horse and be like, I would do that. And I kind of did. I had an idea for a video that involved me directing and being in it that had sexual overtones in nature. Fortunately, we figured out very quickly that doing this without some version of professionalism around it was a horrendous idea. And we were able to find you, which is great. And so I'm curious when you sort of look back at the past couple of years in your projects, how much of your work is bigger studio, bigger budget, kind of uh duh, we need this, versus people more like me who is I don't know what I'm doing. I acknowledge I don't know what I'm doing. And I would really like to lean on your professional expertise to help me bring this thing to life that I know I am not capable of doing.
I feel like it's probably half and half.
Okay.
I literally had a meeting this morning with a director who didn't see the need for an intimacy coordinator. And so I pretty much spent the whole meeting explaining to him why the role is important for the project. And that happens often, especially in Colorado. I think there's only 3 or 4 of us in the whole state right
It's not a
now.
lot.
And there's mostly indie work here right now.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of educating on here's how to work with an intimacy coordinator. Here's when you might need an intimacy coordinator. Overwhelmingly, the feedback I get is, I don't know how I did anything without you before. And I will never work without an IC again on anything that has anything related to nudity, simulated sex, but also things like domestic violence, drug use, exposure of like heightened emotional states. Like there's a lot more to intimacy than just let's take off our clothes and grind against each other.
1,000%. I mean, that's a lot of what we were trying to capture over the last couple of days, is that like there's so much more dynamic and texture, which like is beautiful and can be terrifying in all the other sort of like heightened emotional states that you mentioned. Oh, I just had a question. Where did it go? You are welcome to not answer this question. Like, what is your relationship to intimacy?
Ooh. That is a really good question. And I think because of my upbringing, I tended to be before tended to be a bit of an oversharer and overly intimate in relationships. I would tend to get into sort of a caregiver or even a therapist-y role with friends and loved ones.
Sure.
And that closeness, that intimacy, in the moment that felt good because it was serving some purposes in my system. But as I have gotten older, I think that my boundaries are much better, personally and professionally. And I think I value authentic and genuine intimacy with people far more than I did before, when it felt like, yeah, I'm just like that with everybody.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, like boundaries is you were wearing. If you know the quote top of your head, you should share it. That for the shirt you were wearing last night.
Yeah. Oh, that is, your boundaries are perfect exactly where they are. And that comes from theatrical intimacy education. So shout out to TIE.
There you go. Yeah. And like, I think that's such a beautiful encapsulation of what it was like working with you on set, which is like the baseline assumption is everyone stays within safety. Everyone is allowed to speak up for themselves. Everyone gets to say exactly what they are and aren't willing to do. And we're going to find the Venn diagram pieces where there is overlap and celebration and it's feeling good. And anything outside of that, fuck it. We're not going to do it. And we don't like, no one has to bend. No one has to compromise. Like your boundaries get to be solid and no one feels I hope like no one feels bad or like that was in any way compromised. Is that fair? At least that was my experience of being on set with you for 2 days.
Yeah, that's the goal. And I do explain to actors often, especially actors who have not done nudity or simulated sex or sex adjacent acts before in a performance. I explain to them that it's not going to feel comfortable, but it's not supposed to feel unsafe. And there's a difference between discomfort and nudging your comfort zone versus lack of safety. So
Yes.
I'm there to be sure that we are operating from a place of safety, and I'm there to support navigating uncomfortable stuff, whatever that is that we're depicting.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Um, and I know you mentioned this, like there's intimacy coordination, which I think is primarily how I experienced you on set, but there's also a mental health coordination piece,
Mhm.
which I imagine is drawn out by different kinds of work. Can you talk a little bit about like what that is, where like intimacy coordination, now mental health?
Yeah, and that's a great question because I'm still figuring out the line of demarcation myself
Right.
there. And I think our community of intimacy and mental health coordinators, I think we're all trying to figure out that line of demarcation and what that looks like.
Mm.
So I came to that work by way of being an IC on set and realizing that I wasn't only using the skills that I learned from my intimacy coordinator training, I was also using a lot of my therapist-y skills
Mm.
and feeling like, well, wait a sec, I'm doing the intimacy work, but I'm also doing mental health work. And not every IC is trained in mental health interventions. I
For
mean,
sure.
ICs are supposed to take and get certified in mental health first aid, but that is referral based. It's how to de escalate and then refer out, really, is what mental health first aid is. And it's very valuable. But it doesn't equip someone to navigate if an actor is having a panic attack, or if on screen we are depicting a very intense trauma, assault situation. An intimacy coordinator without advanced training in mental health support and management on set would not be equipped to navigate that. So I sort of myself decided, well, I think there should be another role, and I think we should call it mental health coordinator. And I now do both. I feel maybe it was about a year ago. This person out in Atlanta reached out to me. She had come across me on TikTok and said, I think we're doing similar work. Can we connect? And that's now my business partner, the co-founder of the Association of Mental Health Coordinators, because they also have ADHD. So shout out to Bridget McCarthy, my partner with ADHD. And we created this thing, the Association of Mental Health Coordinators, where we're training people to do this work and trying to normalize the use of someone on set who is there not only to support the mental health of the cast and crew, because, we've all got stuff that we're showing up to work with every day, but also to be sure that we're depicting mental health and mental health adjacent issues responsibly. When we depict suicidality or eating disorders or substance use, there's often tropes and stereotypes that people lean on. And so we provide consultation and support so that we're no longer doing that. We're providing accurate and responsible and ethical storytelling around the mental health stuff, in addition to supporting the mental health and wellness of the people who are working on the thing.
That's beautiful. And somehow popcorn, 12 questions in my brain, which is not that surprising. So the first one that comes up is again, a little more personal, between being an active therapist, particularly one involved in more complex and I'm not sure what the appropriate adjective is, but you could call deeper types of work that are really, really penetrating for the individual involved or individuals. And then on set, you're dealing with the same issues in an environment that is by definition strapped for time, very stressful and semi-chaotic. Even at the best of times, it's a little wild to wrangle that many people. How do you refill your cup? Because that's so much giving.
Yeah, but I think for me, the giving is also receiving. That it's a very different and unique experience to be on a film set or in a rehearsal room for a theatrical production. Time stops, the outside world fades away. You're not really allowed to be on your cell phone, especially when I'm on set. No phone's allowed, right? The whole room is focused on one common goal, and we're all providing a different service working toward that common goal. And that is intimacy in and of itself. Yes. And is such not everyone is cut out for a life on set. Not everyone enjoys the film set experience. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. It's a lot of where is this thing? I asked for it an hour ago. But I get into that zone and I feel the vibe and the flow and that shared vision as a collective, and that fills me up.
I completely understand. And yet film sets, in my very limited experience, are different planet. Different planet, the way people function, the way time moves, the way you kind of go through things, the fact that you normally have to repeat stuff so many times and you're just this is chaos. I don't know how to do this. But it sounds
we even have our own language, right, which you had to learn some of.
Crafty is not a fucking autocorrect for snacks, it turns out. It is its own term. Just so anyone else knows, if you ever want food on set, it is referred to as crafty, which is short for craft services. How Y translate to services? Not my monkey, not my circus. I have no idea how that came to be, but I appreciate it and support it nonetheless.
Now you know.
Now I know. What has been the most, so like, let me be specific with my question. The basic question is, what has been, I'm not going to ask the most. We already covered this. What comes to mind when I ask what have been some really challenging scenes or scenarios that you've been asked to coordinate as the intimacy coordinator, acknowledging that I don't mean like a director who doesn't see your value or people who are super obstinate, but like what actual content has sort of given you the most intricate sort of complex puzzle to navigate?
I mean, a 5-person cuddle puddle is pretty high up there, right? That, yeah.
I don't know.
It is. It is. So typically in my work, when I'm working with multiple not just two partners, but multiple partners, there's often pairings in those scenes. And so I'm more working with couples who are engaged, or it's like just 3 and there's active movement. So the cuddle puddle being all 5 performers at the same time and stillness while the camera sort of rovers, what is
yeah,
roams,
yeah.
Whatever, insert the appropriate word here, thanks. That was definitely a challenge. Another one comes to mind. I did a feature a couple years ago where there were 20 scenes of self-pleasure by the female protagonist character, and when I first heard that,
that's so many.
When I first heard that, I'm like, what else is in the script?
Yeah.
And the challenge there wasn't self-pleasure. Like, I can choreograph that all day. But the fact that there were so many instances of it in the script to make each one interesting and unique. And really, the most important part of my job is not only doing things ethically and safely for the performers, but also, why are we doing that? What is the point? How is this telling the story? How is this moving us through the function of the film, really? So the challenge there is, how do we not make the 13th, 14th, 17th scene of this seem like it's gratuitous or doesn't have a point or purpose, to be so intentional with each one, to see the value in each one of those scenes, and then to make it so that the audience would also see the value in those scenes. That was quite the journey.
Yeah, that is a lot of nuance within a perspective on self-pleasure. 20 times over, you're asking for a lot of detail. I'm very curious. Have you ever been on set and seen something and been like, oh my God, that was amazing, and then seen it in the final product and be like, oh, that didn't quite hit the same way? Or the inverse of like seeing it on set and being like, that's kind of a miss, and then seeing it in the final and be like, oh no, I totally get it now?
I would say it's more the latter than the former. So I'm usually watching the monitor while the performers are performing. So I get a good feel, and I mean, if a director says they're happy, but I could see more, I'm not going to insert myself and be like, we could do better. No, the director's in charge. I'm not stepping on toes, right? I would say it's more, I think, like, I'll see it in the monitor and think that was good. And then some magic happens in post-production, because those editors and colorists and brilliant people. And so there's often the end result, I go, I did not know that was going to look like that. Yeah. So props to them.
Props to everyone. Again, that was part of what was fun over the last couple of days, is just acknowledging like it takes a village. And our village was quite small in the grand scheme of things. And yet like it takes a whole village to make those things happen.
Yeah.
Dear future lover, hope that I find you immersed in self-love. I'm here to remind you, I got a gifted tongue, slide like an ice cube. If you ask me to, I'm not gonna bite you, but I'd be happy to. Are you ready for your crown? Are you ready for your
This
throne?
is a purely selfish question, but it's also my podcast, so we'll just go for it. What was unique about the last 2 days?
I mean, a lot of things outside of the cuddle puddle, I think. Well, I loved working with my sister, so thank you for bringing her on.
She's amazing.
Thank you. I think so too. I wouldn't have recommended her unless I really thought that she was going to be perfect for it. So Lark has done my makeup for pretty much everything important in my adult life. But we have never had the opportunity to collaborate on set like that. And so that made it just such a special and unique and lovely experience. I work very closely with hair and makeup on set because I mean, really, they were doing the intimacy work before intimacy coordinators were a thing. You know, they're getting actors fired up and hey, let me add this barrier to your fit. Let me collaborate with wardrobe to be sure that you feel okay in this outfit. You know, like they are superheroes, and so I'm used to cultivating those relationships. But to do so with my sister, where there already is the relationship, was just so beautiful, and she's so good at making people feel so beautiful. She is.
Yes, she is.
So I loved that. I so typically we don't have 5 naked people at one time, right? So that was special and unique. Not having sound was a breath of fresh air, right? I didn't have to worry about smacking my head or letting booms in the shot, or you know, that was wonderful. So yeah.
Lovely. Awesome. It's one of the joys of not knowing what you don't know. As like I had been on one set before that and then this one, and like if that's good or bad, probably on both sides, right? Like there's some ignorance is truly bliss, and some ignorance like probably makes things a little bit harder. But anyway, it's always interesting to hear from people who do this all the time, sort of what stands out, what is unique, what is specific, all those good things. So I appreciate you sharing very much.
Yeah.
And you said you're about to head to LA.
Yeah.
What's in LA?
Yeah. A little bit of fun and a little bit of work as per usual.
Yes.
Can't talk about it, which, you know, typical, but
Yeah.
all the NDAs for all the things, you know.
Sure. I was about to ask more questions like she literally just said. She can't talk about it. So
I'm sorry.
No, oh my God, don't be. How does your work, and I'm going to leave it as broad as your work, sort of inform the way you think about, I don't like the term like raising your children, but when you find yourself in the role of mom, mother, whatever your preferred term is, like how do you find your experiences and work coming in and influencing the way that you're with your children?
I mean, I probably know too much for my own good because I specialize in trauma. And so I'm very much aware of all the ways that I could screw them up royally. I'm
Yes.
also very much aware of all the epigenetic influences that I was passing on to those babies without
Sure.
meaning to. Um, so yeah, there's definitely some of that feeling like it's all wrong. Everything's wrong. I don't know what to do. I just know all the bad things to not do.
Right.
And that, I think that poses challenges with parenting with another human as well, because it's not like, so I'm married. It's not like my husband got a master's degree in counseling and decided to study childhood trauma, you know? And so there initially was a lot of like me just saying, don't do that, stop doing that, we should be doing this, which doesn't feel good for anyone to receive that constantly. So there's been a lot of growth for both of us, in terms of how to learn together to do better and how to not parent from a place of fear that we're going to screw them up, but more of empowerment that we, you know, I like to talk about how we should be treating children with the level of respect that we treat adults with. but with expectations for them at a child level.
Right.
But oftentimes in American culture, we do the inverse of that. So we treat children with very little respect, but we have the expectation that they're going to act like adults and like respond to challenges and emotions like an adult should. Feeling like if we keep the respect really high in our household, then we're cultivating that amongst all of us, and having a realistic expectation of what we're going to see and hear and experience in terms of behaviors from children, because they are children. But yeah, that just comes from like, I can't help it because I went to school for this and continued to, so yeah.
Totally. And like there are many things I feel like you're not told as a parent to be by previous parents, which has left me with an enormous grudge of just like, why don't we talk about these things? It feels like this would be super valuable information. The biggest of which is like, you as a parent are actively navigating your trauma while trying to not pass it on to your kid at the same time. Which, like, if you're looking for a real mind fuck, I highly recommend it, because wow, it is like having your brain in 7 places at once, and the stakes feel as high as they've ever been for anything in your entire life. Just for the added pressure, it is wild. But that makes a ton of sense, and I'm I feel my brain spinning around like the dynamic between you and your partner, and your desire to find the balance between like bringing forth this information that you have, these experiences you have, and also honoring that there's a human relationship there, and you have a partnership that is multivariate and multi-layered in so many ways. And so like this can't become sort of an anchor that brings everything else down, because that's also not in service of your children or your family dynamic, and like all those different little textures. Although in some ways I imagine you're as well prepared to navigate that as anybody doing what you do.
One could argue either side of that.
Sure. And nobody's perfect. And so even if you had quote unquote all of the perfect whatevers, like there would still be opportunity for it to be kind of chaotic. The start of mental health coordination makes a ton of sense. And I like the question I'm evolving toward is like, what changes would you like to see? And I guess I could ask it within entertainment, within the world, but like we'll start with entertainment and go from there, about like how mental health is navigated, acknowledged, talk about, just kind of like, where would you like to see things go in the next 5 to 10 years?
Specifically for entertainment, I feel like I have my hands in a few different buckets working toward change in the industry. One is obviously actively working as an intimacy coordinator and mental health coordinator, actually doing the job and being present for that so that things actually are changing on set day to day. And then also training people to do the job in mental health coordination is a big part, another big bucket that I've got my hand in there. I'm also working collaboratively with a couple of former Disney and Nickelodeon child stars. Christy Carlson Romano from Even Stevens, she founded the Coalition for Child Performers. And so there's a few of us that have collaborated with a few of them in an effort to push forward, hopefully someday, some legislation to protect child performers, because there isn't much in the way of that. And I think really we need to start with when people are young in order to foster change over time, because we're setting, if whether you're a kid and you're in entertainment or you're an adult with childhood trauma in entertainment, because who isn't, right, we need to be creating change starting as early as possible. And so that's another bucket where I've got my hand actively working to normalize the use of professionals who are specifically on set to to protect and serve the health and wellness of everyone, and then also providing education to the general population, to production companies, to parents of child actors, just so when we know better, we do better, I hope.
For sure. I think, like, at the risk of exposing my own ignorance, something I think about a lot is, like, I think it's really valuable that the conversation on trauma is expanding and evolving the way that it is. And I think the word trauma is one that I think so many more people have just spoken and considered in the last 5 years, again, relative to the previous 50 or whatever it would be. And where I get curious is, like, so obviously there is nuance, there is training, there is professionalism, there are better, more appropriate ways to navigate trauma or support someone in navigating trauma. But at the same time, if we confine that expertise and that ability only to this very, very small population of people, do we then deny access to that education and information and opportunity to navigate trauma by cordoning it off into this small world? And, like, there's not technically a question there, but, like, does that make sense? How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, we already know that mental health care is for the privileged. That's just how our society has functioned for a long time. Even where I am, I'm one of the few mental health professionals who takes Medicaid down here in Parker. And that is infuriating because I can't see everyone. I wish I had a larger referral network to serve people people on Medicaid are often the people who need the most support for their mental health and navigating the challenges that come with that. Especially those, foster and adopted kids get Medicaid, and where are they supposed to go if there are no therapists who can see them? So yeah, that said, therapy absolutely is not the be all end all of healing ourselves from trauma. And for these purposes, I really define trauma as something that happens to us or something that we experience in our life that surpasses our capacity to cope. So whether we lack the relationship or the relational safety to sort of come back to a sense of safety, or if some tragedy happens and we are lost for a moment, that it could be any number of things that, we used to say capital T or lowercase t trauma kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're moving away from that because no trauma is more legitimate than another. But I know that more holistic or more indigenous or culturally informed practices, sometimes body work, somatic work, energy work, ceremonies, those kinds of things that the privileged white people in America go to therapy, but there are other healing modalities which might be more culturally helpful depending upon someone's community and upbringing and support that they have. So I'm not one to be like, everyone deserves therapy, because I actually don't think that therapy, especially because the majority of therapists are white women, I don't think therapy is actually helpful for every single person. But I think having an understanding that everyone deserves community and everyone deserves support and everyone deserves the opportunity for their own healing experience. And I'm not one to dictate what that looks like for anybody.
Yeah, 100%. And I like, flip side to the argument I previously made is that I think as therapy proliferates, specialization continues to develop, which means now it's not therapy as just like, go to therapy. It's like, which modality? What type of therapist? What has been their background? Who do they typically work with? Where are they from? Like, there's more opportunity to find alignment with the person delivering the therapy and the style with which they deliver it, even if therapy isn't ultimately the best option. There's at least some nuance, because, like, I remember going through a revolving door phase of meeting with 4 or 5 people and being like, there's no fucking way. Yeah. Like, there's a 0% chance this is going to be helpful, which is particularly defeating because you pluck up the courage to go see someone, you leave and you're like, oh no, like, I can't do therapy. Fuck. Like, I remember that as a not great feeling walking out of those offices.
Absolutely. And even that, as you're describing that, that had so much privilege to have the time and energy and motivation and financial security to be able to sort of interview multiple clinicians, to even go through their list of specialties and to be able to choose. There's so many people who don't get any of those opportunities, and then, you know, culturally we look at them and we're like, why aren't you going to therapy? Like, there are a lot of reasons why people don't go to therapy, and that's just a few of them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I appreciate the reminder very, very much. Amanda, where can people learn more about you, find out more about what you do, potentially work with you?
That's a good question. My website, my personal website is amandamadwards.com. M as in mother. That's not my middle name, but amandamadwards.com. Or associationmhc.com. That's the Association of Mental Health Coordinators website. I'm on TikTok at Amanda M. Edwards LPC, as in licensed professional counselor, Amanda M. Edwards LPC on TikTok. TikTok is more of where I'm just answering people's questions. I never wanted to create TikTok content. Let's have this discussion.
Let's do it.
I was a consumer of TikTok content, and I came across a video where a youngish white female clinician was talking about how sending clients to the hospital was just not something she did, and she works with her clients to establish their safety, and we should not be sending clients to the hospital. And I just became so angry that she was stigmatizing use of the hospital, and it felt very shamey of people who benefit from the hospital and therapists who need to utilize the hospital as a tool to support their client safety, that I did what's it called? A stitch, right? That's where like it shows a bit of the other person's video and then it's your video. So I did a stitch. And the response to that, people kept asking questions in the comments. And I'm like, I guess I have to answer these questions. So every single one of my videos is just me replying to a question on a previous video, because I'm like, apparently no one's answering these questions. So I'm answering these questions. So I never wanted to be on TikTok. And now here we are. I don't know how many, over 10,000 followers at this point on TikTok, which just feels ridiculous because I'm just answering questions that people really should be asking their therapists. But here we are.
I completely see the perspective that it is ridiculous, but also if you were trying to chart like, where would I hope that someone finds growth on a social media platform by providing valuable information based on real lived expertise, coming from a perspective of how can I be loving and inclusive in the way that I share this information? I would sign up for more of that generally. So you may have tripped into it, but like also stumbled into the formula of like exactly what I think people are hoping to provide, which normally ends up being like, here's 6 hooks you can use for your TikTok videos times a billion. It's like we have quite enough of, and probably not enough of people like you who actually have, again, training and lived experiences and successes and mistakes. And you can take all that experience and speak to people's problems in a way that is more than just, again, a click-worthy sort of like broad stripe of like, this is bad. Is it? Do we really have the authority or ability to just say like all of this is bad, or are we just doing something because it's easy and it's clickable? And it's like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I would say too, as I'm digesting what we're talking about, that being on TikTok has also given me the opportunity to reflect on some of my privilege and some misinformation that I had. There have been a couple of times when someone has called me out to say, like, I don't think that's right, or that actually my experience is different. And then I have the opportunity to sit with myself feeling like, oh shit, and digest like, okay, it's okay to make mistakes, and let me go ahead and make a reply to that, or highlight someone else's video on there. Like, can I stitch someone or duet someone so that I am enhancing the visibility of someone who is speaking with more authority than I am, especially for, BIPOC creators in the mental health sphere on TikTok. I have a lot of opportunity to uplift and collaborate with those voices, which feels really important. So as much as I had no intention of being on TikTok, there has been a lot of learning and growth. And obviously it serves a sense of purpose for some people. So, yeah.
Yes. Well, and it's how you found your business partner, which is like a beautiful made for TV movie story, which who doesn't love those? Like, those are super delightful. You just mentioned something, and like, I'm hopeful that you'll speak on it. It's something I feel like I'm working on a lot, which is like you receive a piece of information about a way that you might have been misguided or misinformed, and you sit with it, and then you make a decision about how to move on. And I think like there's a space in which you have to choose to separate like this information from the quality of who you are as a human being. And like, to speak more plainly, like, I have a very easy time hearing negative feedback, being like, oh no, I'm a fucking piece of garbage. And then like, rather than actually doing something about it, I just retreat and I'm like, oh my God, please no one look at me. So can you talk about, and maybe from more of a therapeutic or psychological perspective, like breaking down that process, and if you have any tips on how to navigate that with more grace or elegance, I would so welcome them.
Yeah. My favorite resource for that is actually the book My Grandmother's Hands, which examines our racial prejudices, internal and culturally, and how we experience discomfort when confronted with them, and then what to do with that discomfort. I feel like reading that and incorporating those practices into my own life has been really helpful for me to be able to tolerate being called in for a learning experience, whether it's racial or otherwise. And so, yeah, that's my favorite resource for that. It is not a light read, but it's not super long, and it's for everyone. My Grandmother's Hands. For my own experience of that, I had to learn a long time ago that doing a bad thing does not mean you're a bad person, and that good people sometimes do bad things. And then being able to reform and reframe that even further to be good people can make mistakes. Not every mistake is necessarily a bad thing. And to have more flexibility and nuance around that. If I am confronted in a situation where I have made a mistake and someone was hurt, then I defer to them. Like, what do you need from me or outside of me to make this better? Because I don't have the answers for other people. I have my answers for myself, but I'm not going to impose that on someone else. If I have made a mistake and no one was hurt in the process, then I'm very quick to just have gratitude for the learning experience, that I didn't know then what I know now. And I am so grateful that this person called me in to educate me on this thing. And now I'm doing better. Onset yesterday, yes, we were talking about bringing faces together, and I suggested the nose to nose, and I used the offensive word. And it took me 15 seconds maybe to be like, oh, sorry, everybody, I'm sorry, that is not the way. And then I got to educate everyone else there who didn't know that we don't do that, and we don't call. Yeah. So I try to approach it as an opportunity for learning and bettering myself, and letting go of my actions aren't necessarily the definition of me. So doing a bad thing or making a mistake or even hurting someone doesn't mean I am bad. And if I jump into the I am bad, then I'm no longer helping anybody. That does no one any good. I'm far more functional as a person giving of myself if I'm not coming from a place of I suck, I'm awful, I'm bad, the shutdown, coming from a place of awareness and integrity and just wanting to do better and humility. I know that that's how I'm going to get my job done better. So I try to live in that space.
That was beautifully answered. Thank you. I have one final question for you, which is if you could go back to the day that you went full Gemini and bought all the books and did all the things and decided that you were going to become an intimacy coordinator, and you could offer either a piece of advice or supportive guidance to yourself several years ago, what would you say?
Oh man, why is that question so hard? Probably to trust that it's gonna be great. Because I think my tendency to dive, to do the hyper focus thing, can get me into a lot. It has gotten me into a lot of trouble previously, and so there's always a sense of like, what did I just get myself into? With stuff like that. And so if I could reassure myself and let myself know that it was going to be great and it was going to be worth diving headfirst into, unlike so many other hyper focuses I've had, that would have been lovely for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Amanda, this was lovely. Thank you again for today, for the last 2 days, for all of the beautiful work you've done with me and with all the people. You're doing incredible, incredible work, and it is great. So I hope that you know that in your heart now. Thank you again. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you too. Absolutely.
So some of you might know I rap, I make music. That's what I do sort of primarily in addition to this podcast. And for a very long time, I had considered doing an album. I had thought about it, but I had never pulled the trigger, and that has finally changed. My debut album, Integration, is coming out November 2nd of this year, 2023. I'm immensely proud of the project. We have so much fun content with behind the scenes and music videos and visualizers and all kinds of cool shit. So from now until the album releases, you'll see more and more of that stuff coming up on Instagram and TikTok and all of the places. But most importantly, I want you to be there for when the album comes out. So if you're interested, if you're willing, I would love for you to pre-save it, or if you want, you can reach out to me and I can even share some clips of the album with you. I'm, again, so proud of it, and I can't wait to share it with you. Thank you for watching Stage Dive again. My name is Jack Dawkins. It was a pleasure to have you here. Before I sign off, I do want to thank Kalisa Mickle and Holly Johnson for being the hearts, the guts, the brains behind the operations that make this entire podcast possible. They work so hard to continue to improve it and put it in front of more people and allow it to continue to live on. So thank you to them, thank you to our guest, and thank you to you for watching. I appreciate you.